The knock came while I was pouring coffee in my Lincoln Park brownstone. 3 hard raps that sounded less like company and more like a demand. I set the mug down, wiped my hand on my robe, and opened the door without rushing, too tired from the week behind me to waste energy on surprise. Sierra Reed stood on my front step in a cream coat and heels, a slim folder under one arm, smiling like a woman who believed she had come to claim my life. She looked me over once and told me to start packing because Grant had taken care of the house, and the sooner I moved my things, the easier this would be. She raised the folder just enough to suggest paperwork, ownership, and a future she thought had been handed to her. I looked at her face, at the satisfaction in it, and instead of anger, I felt something colder settle into place. I stepped back and told her to come in, and that invitation startled her more than a slammed door would have, because women who rehearse another woman's humiliation expect resistance. She crossed the threshold carefully, her heels striking the hardwood I had chosen years ago, and her gaze moved through the foyer like she was already deciding what would stay. I closed the door behind her, let the silence hold for one beat, and watched the moment she realized she was not alone. Owen Crawford stood several feet inside with a file in his hand, quiet enough to disappear until needed, and composed enough to kill panic. Sierra's shoulders tightened before her expression could recover, and that shift told me more than any denial she might have offered. I kept my eyes on her and said that before she started planning where to put her furniture. There was something she needed to hear from the man behind her. Grant had not married into my life because he admired what I built, and I understood that long before Sierra showed up at my door carrying a folder she could not read. He married into access, into a polished address, into a client list full of women who hosted board dinners, donor receptions, gallery previews, and private holiday salons where money moved quietly and taste mattered. In the beginning, he played the grateful husband so well that even I mistook his appetite for loyalty, because men like Grant never reach for the woman first. They reach for the world they think comes attached to her. My studio was never some decorative side project he tolerated out of love, no matter how often he joked that I made expensive paper for people with too much time. It paid bills, opened rooms, built trust, and placed my name in circles where every introduction carried weight. And Grant learned fast that standing beside me made him look larger than he was. After that, every small insult landed differently, because once he started mocking the work that fed our life, I could hear the truth under it, which was that he wanted the benefits without ever respecting the engine. I first saw Sierra where she never should have been. Seated beside him at a private donor dinner I had helped secure through relationships he had no right to borrow. He was leaning toward her with that easy smile I had not seen in years, and she was listening like a woman already trying on a life that had not been offered to her by fate but by theft. I did not walk over, did not make a scene, and did not give them the cheap satisfaction of seeing me break in public, because the evidence in front of me was cleaner than emotion and far more useful. The next morning I called Owen, then Dana, and after that I stopped reacting and started tracing, because betrayal always gets sloppier once it thinks it is hidden. Dana found exported contact files, irregular login attempts, vendor messages opened outside normal hours, and money pulled from our joint account in amounts just small enough to look casual if no one was paying attention. Mallory came to me with the rest, with stories about Sierra drifting too close to client conversations and speaking in that smooth, presumptuous tone women use when they are practicing ownership before they have earned entry. That was when I understood the affair was only the visible part, and the real plan was wider, colder, and much more insulting, because they were not trying to replace me in private. They were trying to slide her into my place inside the whole system I had built. The house, the client trust, the visual polish, the social standing, the soft authority that made doors open before either of them knew how to knock. Once I saw that, I stopped grieving my marriage and started protecting the life underneath it, which was the part Grant had wanted all along. Sierra straightened her shoulders, lifted Grant's folder, and insisted everything had been reviewed, signed, and settled, as if confidence could do the work Grant never had. I said nothing at first, because the only thing worth answering in the foyer was the paper in her hand. And Owen understood that before I moved, he stepped forward, opened his file, and told her with calm precision that whatever Grant had given her was not ownership, authority, or entry into my house. She looked from him to me, then down at the folder in her hands, as though the pages might still turn into something true if she waited. Owen kept his tone even and explained the brownstone had come to me through inheritance before I met Grant, which left him with no title to transfer. I crossed to the console table, picked up the property file, and brought it back between us, because dates and signatures were about to do my speaking. When I opened it, her face changed at the first page, then the second, because every recorded line carried my name cleanly from start to finish. I told her the house had been mine before the marriage, had stayed mine during the marriage, and was still mine now, regardless of Grant's fantasies. Then I placed the chain of title where she could see it and let the silence sit, because silence lands harder when paper has ended the argument. She tried again anyway, quieter this time, insisting Grant said his attorneys had worked everything out and that the transfer was already in motion legally. Owen closed that door in one breath and told her there was no valid transfer, no completed claim, and no divorce giving Grant my house. I watched the confidence leave her in pieces. First, the smugness, then the irritation, then the brittle little smile she had carried to my door. What remained was panic, because the house was never just a house to her. It was the future Grant had promised her inside my life. I slid her folder back into her hands and told her that if Grant had promised mornings here, dinners here, or a life here, he lied. Sierra looked around my foyer, no longer like a woman choosing where to place furniture, but like someone who had walked into the wrong story. Sierra gripped her phone so tightly I could see the polish blanch at her nails. Then she hit Grant's number and turned on speaker before either Owen or I moved. He answered in that easy, intimate voice men use when they still believe the lie is holding, and the sound of it changed her face faster than my paperwork had. She cut straight through his greeting and demanded to know why my house was still mine, why he had sent her here with promises he could not back up, and why she was standing in my foyer looking stupid. For 1 second, Grant tried to recover with tone alone, lowering his voice, calling her baby, urging her to calm down, as if softer words could rebuild a house he never owned. Then I heard the shift, that slight break underneath his confidence, because Sierra was no longer asking for reassurance. She was listing specifics: the title, the inheritance, the documents, the fact that Owen was standing beside me with the real file. I stayed quiet long enough to let him hear the damage in her breathing, because panic tells the truth before pride remembers to interrupt it. When he finally tried to say he was still working things out, I stepped in and told him there was nothing left to work out, because he had never possessed the property, the transfer rights, or the future he sold. That was when Sierra turned toward me with real anger instead of performance, and I understood she was not just humiliated. She was furious that the prize had vanished after she had already stepped out of line to reach for it. I walked to the entry table, lifted the printed email chain Dana had prepared, and placed it on the console between us so she could see her own name before either of us spoke. Her eyes dropped to the pages, and the air in the room changed again, because there was her draft message to 2 clients about the next chapter of the brand. There was her mood board for new colors, her notes on filming a first morning in the house, and a line she wrote to Grant about how I would either cry or fold. I did not have to accuse her of joining the plan, because her own words were sitting there in black ink, clean, dated, and impossible to explain away. Grant heard the silence on speaker and started talking faster, trying to pull everything back toward confusion. But that opening was gone, and all three of us knew it. Sierra looked from the emails to my face, then back to the phone. And what broke in her then was not innocence, because innocence had never made those drafts. What broke was calculation, because she finally understood she had not been tricked into love. She had signed herself into a takeover that missed its mark. I did not need a screaming match after that call, because by then the useful part of the morning was already sitting on my console in ink. Timestamps, account records, and names. Owen moved first, tightening the legal side before Grant could invent another version of events, locking down the property issue, documenting the account withdrawals, and sending notice over any misuse of my business materials. What looked from the outside like silence was actually pressure, clean and patient. Applied in every place Grant had assumed I would be too emotional to protect. Dana finished tracing what he had touched, and the ugliness of it was almost boring in its predictability. Small withdrawals, copied client exports, late logins, vendor messages opened without authority. He had not been careful enough to disappear, only arrogant enough to think I would miss the pattern while grieving the affair he believed mattered most. By the time Owen had the timeline in order, Grant was no longer standing in a romantic mess. He was standing in a documented one, and documents age better than excuses. Mallory handled the social side with the same restraint that built my reputation in the first place, confirming appointments, calming donors, and making sure every client heard one clean fact from me. There was no public scene, no gossip campaign, no thirsty attempt to turn humiliation into content, just the quiet correction of access, authorship, and trust. In my world, that landed harder, because people with real money do not need spectacle to understand who belongs in a room and who only slipped in carrying someone else's name. Sierra disappeared for several days after she walked out of my house, and when she resurfaced, she did not come back to my door, rehearsing courage she no longer had. Her material reached Owen first. Voice notes, messages, and calendar screenshots showing Grant promising a future that depended on my house, my clients, and my collapse. I accepted the evidence through counsel and nowhere else, because whatever clarity had finally reached her, it did not erase the fact that she had tried to step into my life while it was still warm. That was the part Grant never understood. That revenge in the real world is not loud when it is built correctly, and it does not need fury once the exits are sealed. He kept trying to sell explanations while the legal lane narrowed. The money dried up, and the social angle he counted on folded in on itself without my having to chase it. By the end of that week, I had not destroyed him with one dramatic move. I had simply removed every borrowed advantage he had mistaken for his own. After that week, the strangest part was not the silence Grant left behind, but the quiet inside my own body once I stopped waiting for the next hit. I slept through the night without checking my phone, drank coffee in my own kitchen without bracing for another knock, and walked through my house without feeling like I had to defend every room from memory. Healing did not arrive as triumph, and it did not feel glamorous, because it was mostly a series of ordinary mornings where my pulse finally stopped acting like danger lived in the walls. At the studio, I stopped explaining myself to ghosts, which turned out to be its own kind of freedom, after years of shrinking my decisions down to a size Grant could tolerate. Dana tightened operations. Mallory reworked the client flow, and I realized how much cleaner everything felt once the man, draining energy from my life, was no longer standing in the doorway of every plan. The work did not become easier, but it became mine again in a way I had not fully understood. It was not while I was still married. I refined the business the same way I had rebuilt my personal life, by removing what was noisy, expensive, performative, and built to impress people who never respected the labor underneath it. We kept fewer clients, raised the standard, protected access, and shaped the studio into something more private, more exact, and more aligned with the women who valued discretion over spectacle. What I built after Grant was not bigger for the sake of appearances. It was sharper, calmer, and far more honest about the level I had always belonged on. News of him reached me the way bad news usually reaches women who have finally stopped asking for it. Sideways. Through a filing update. A denied application. A passing mention that landed without surprise. His money tightened. His options narrowed. And the life he thought would carry him once he stepped out of mine kept reducing itself until it looked exactly like what it had always been. Borrowed. Sierra did not escape clean either. Because whatever sympathy she might have earned by walking away could not erase the fact that she had walked in, willing to take my place before she knew the floor would collapse. The difference was that I no longer needed either of them to suffer in order to feel restored. Because by then, restoration had become practical, visible, and entirely my own. It was the full night of sleep, the payroll that cleared on time, the client who rebooked privately, the room that stayed peaceful because I finally understood I was allowed to keep it that way. Once that settled in, I stopped thinking of myself as a woman who survived Grant and started recognizing the truth that mattered more, which was that I had outgrown him long before he ever left. A year later, my life no longer looked like something I had salvaged from a fire, and that difference showed up in ways Grant would never have understood. The Lincoln Park studio still ran by appointment, but the second space in West Loop had settled into its own rhythm. Quieter, sharper, and built for the kind of clients who valued precision more than performance. What I had after him was not a comeback dressed up for strangers, but a life that fit cleanly because every part of it now answered to me. I saw Grant again in the most ordinary place possible, beside a gas pump on a gray afternoon, standing next to a car that looked older than the version of himself he used to sell. He noticed me at almost the same moment, and whatever he expected to find on my face, regret, pity, some softening he could still use, he did not find it there. I gave him a brief nod, the kind you offer a person who once mattered and no longer has access. Then I closed my door and drove away. Sierra reappeared later in a way that felt almost fitting. Not at my house. Not at a restaurant. Not through Owen. But across the consultation table in my own studio, she had a new job. A steadier voice. And a request for thank you cards that she placed with both hands on the table. Like she understood exactly whose name mattered in that room. I took the order. Kept the exchange clean. And when she murmured that she was trying to do things differently now, I told her I hoped she meant it and left it there. By then I had learned that closure does not usually arrive as a speech. And it does not need every person who hurt you to fully understand what they lost. It is enough when your sleep is steady. Your work is protected. Your rooms feel peaceful again. And the future in front of you no longer has his fingerprints on it. Somewhere inside that calmer life, without spectacle and without announcement, I also made room for a quieter kind of love. The kind that never asked me to become smaller to keep it comfortable. Grant's mistake had never been that he cheated, although that would have been enough to end a marriage with dignity intact if he had left honestly. His real mistake was believing he could stand inside a world I built, force me out of it, and still have the world choose him after I was gone. He did not lose because I took revenge in one dramatic strike. He lost because once my name, my labor, my house, and my credibility were removed from under him, there was nothing solid left for him to stand on.